Hello and welcome to the first session of Karen's Colours for 2026. This is going to be one of those monthly colour forecasts, but before embarking on a reading for January 2026, I'd like to remind us all that this is a traditional time to review the past year before setting out our goals and resolutions for the upcoming year. If you've already done those resolutions, then maybe you might like to consider them in the light of what I present today. We're going to be examining the progress made, the setbacks encountered, the challenges that we've overcome, and the work that has been left undone. But before we begin, thank you once again for attending this session. I know that there are not many of you that do so, but I'm certainly hoping that those of you who do will get something positive out of these readings. The reading itself is going to be rather truncated because I'll spend most of the time looking at 2025 in review. We're going to be examining the colours of the main skills and experiences that you've had, the colours of the primary blockages or deficits that have afflicted you throughout the year. And the review will encourage you to think where you're going to go next. There'll be creation of New Year's resolutions that are involved, but those, of course, are very personal to you. And of course, because we make New Year's resolutions, there are lots of goals to be set, lots of ideas about where we want to go next. There is an importance in reviewing past experience so that we can create a future path. And that future path will be denoted by one colour card for January 26. And I'm going to also give you an oracle card to help guide the way. But otherwise, the reading will be extremely truncated. Certainly, enjoy. Moving on now to people born in the month of June. How did your 2025 move you through the year? As we started the year in February for these readings, we find that the one colour that seemed to be the most important was purple. And it demonstrated that in February, your year was one of changes and challenges in all sorts of different directions. By March, those challenges and changes had all been disrupted by a sense of confusion. And that confusion then led you in April to begin to create a number of different ambitions, goals, opportunities to learn something new, the development of new skills, but you did all of these in secret. By May, the colour that predominated was yellow. You had, in fact, learned a lot of new things. So that new knowledge was standing you in good stead, because by June, when brown reappeared as a dominant colour, this time alongside blue, you had developed the skills that were necessary for whatever tasks you had envisaged, and you were starting to get organised. Trouble was, by July, your work had been a little overpowering. And here we find that black and purple took over. You needed time out to feel it, time to settle down. You'd obviously done far too much. And so now it was time to sit back, relax, and try and let the world catch up with what you were doing. By August, that time out had set you in good stead. You now had cyan as the dominant colour. And so things were moving along quietly, and in a way, you were feeling at peace with the world. By September, there was a move into green and brown as the dominant colours. Now, brown, once again, showed a need and drive towards learning new skills, to having set up new goals, new ambitions, new ways of doing and approaching the world. But the green also enabled you to take up new opportunities. They were offered to you. You had the freedom to focus on the tasks at hand, but also the freedom to start off in new directions. By October, that had led you to a state of being very comfortable with yourself and with everything around you. And that comfortability still continued, but it tended to lead towards a state of boredom. The cyan was still there, but now it had been accompanied by an upsurge of pink. Pink actually created a bit of a problem for you because now you were feeling vulnerable and a little bit out of your depth. You needed assistance. And even though everything seemed to be all right, because you couldn't do it on your own, that caused quite a bit of discontent. By December, you were starting to become very, very vigilant as to who and what and how you were going to accept any of that assistance. You developed a fair degree of uncertainty. Were you really going in the direction that you wanted to go? And if so, why was it that although you were curious about where to head, you still were uncertain about where you would end up? Now, the one colour that predominated throughout the year was cyan. It appeared 13 times, many more times than any other colour. And cyan is all about understanding, about peace, about harmony, about feeling very, very settled and satisfied with your life. And in many ways, that's exactly how you have gone throughout the year. It's been fairly calm and peaceful for you, and certainly has gone along the way that you wanted it to. But at the same time, there were a number of issues that you were trying to avoid, things that were uncomfortable for you, things that you really didn't want to deal with in any real way. As we started off February, we had a baseline of colours that appeared as the issues that you were facing. By March, these had consolidated into two that seemed to come forward. They were black and green, new opportunities, but also the need to withdraw and hang back and wait for your heart to tell you which direction to go in. Both of these became a problem. And by April, they were so much of a problem that they in fact created so many different issues for you that you were really quite scattered all over the place. Things were not going your way at all. By May, that had come down to three colours: white, red, and blue. There was a clash with reality. Suddenly, you were faced with the real world and having to deal with whatever it threw at you. There was a need for managing your time through the blue, but also your energy through the red. And in fact, what that led you to was a good deal of frustration and inability to get yourself organized. These are all issues that you were trying to avoid, but nevertheless still impinged upon your life. By June, red had become the predominant colour. A great deal of frustration and reasonable amount of anger that was hanging back there in the background. By July, the red was still there, but now it was accompanied by green and blue and grey. Opportunities were missing. You couldn't get yourself organised, and life just didn't seem to be going the way that you wanted it to. By August, this had all consolidated into a blue issue. Organisation was there, stability was there, but it was out of reach for you. By September, you were still fairly busy. That reality had stepped back in again, creating more of that disruption and distraction that comes from red and blue, which are virtually fighting one another for dominance. But this time there was also a need to stand up, be counted, face reality, and survive. Did you have the courage? By October, this had gone down to white and blue. Now you knew that things were not going to go your way the way that you had planned. So instead, you were trying very hard to look at things from a different perspective or to present the world from a different perspective. But that wasn't really working very well either. By November, reality had really set in, and it was something you really didn't want to deal with. And in December, the reality had created a crisis that required you to begin frantically to start working on something new. But again, these were issues that you were having real problems with, because none of these were issues that you wanted to deal with, but they were there nevertheless. So which of these colours were the ones that were the major issues throughout your year? Well, we have three of them: white and brown and orange. White was all about curiosity, enlightenment, being overwhelmed, having to experience things, inspiration and shock. These are all problems that arose for you. The brown was all about your goals and practical skills. Were you able to achieve any of them? There was ambition and determination, but were you in fact grounded enough and stable enough to be able to carry any of those through? The orange showed crisis and confidence were lacking. While there was an attempt at sociability and a display of confidence, nevertheless, were you able to survive and be cautious in the way in which you dealt with the conflicts that arose for you? As a summary for the entire year, it showed that there were satisfactory relationships that you were creating, but these were disrupted by an inability to respond to the unknown, the unexpected, and coupled with a lack of skills with which to overcome the crisis, you really had a very tough year. So bringing all of these problems and all of these experiences with you into 2026, what now can you do to overcome them? The oracle card I've chosen for this is The Soul's Journey by James Van Praagh, who has created a series of cards that are like little meditations for people, little sayings that you can repeat to yourself throughout the year to enable you to carry on in a way that makes 2026 a lot more comfortable. But first, let's choose a card from the colour deck to determine what sorts of skills you might need to overcome the issues that have faced you in 2025. And what we have here is black on red. Black on red is the sexuality combination. What it says is that inside yourself is a need to dominate, is a need to recognize who you are and what you can accomplish. But in the real world, there is a lot of difficulty in being able to portray that to others in such a way that they can recognize who you are and what your worth is. I said this was the color of the sexuality conflict. Sexuality has to do with how you present yourself to the world. And as a June person, you have had difficulty in being able to show the world just what you are made of and what it is that you are able to accomplish and why you want to do it the way that you're doing it. Let's have a look at an oracle card that goes with this. What you need to develop here is some empathy. And the empathy here says, I am open to seeing both sides of a situation. That's been a real conflict for you throughout 2025, because that white, that having to constantly face reality, shows that you weren't in fact dealing with both sides of the situation. You had certain goals, certain ambitions, certain skills that you wanted to use for your own purposes, but you weren't thinking about how that would influence others. So perhaps now, with your sexuality crisis, that is wanting the world and yourself to regard yourself as who you really are, empathy probably wouldn't go astray. Well, I hope you've received something positive out of that annual review and have taken on board the small colour reading and affirmation as a guide towards 2026. Certainly, looking at these readings from an annual perspective, a retrospective, I've come across a number of insights, both for myself, but also on behalf of those people that I know that have birthdays in the various months that I have been reading for. And one of the things that's come up here is whether or not I would even bother to continue with these. I feel hopeful that I should. I also feel as though I need to make some alterations. If you can think of suggestions that might make these more user-friendly, if you've been following the readings at all, you might even find that there's something in them that you might like to comment about. And I'd really appreciate those comments, because right now I'm in a dilemma, which is why I haven't actually done a full reading for every month, for every birthday month for January. It all depends on the results of this reading as to whether or not I continue. I have a lot to contemplate. My black is quite prominent too. Anyway, if you're new here and you haven't actually seen these before, you might think they're a bit confusing. That's part and parcel of a colour reading. It's something that most people will never have experienced. So I wish you all the best for 2026, and hopefully we'll meet again for more colour readings. If not, plenty of other things I can talk about that have to do with colour. Until next time, bye.